My name is Sam Sherman. I'm a veteran filmmaker. I'm the president of Independent International Pictures Corp. that has made and distributed a lot of cult movies. And with my late partner and great friend Al Adamson, we did all kinds of crazy films, and people are still enjoying them.
How did your decision come about to enroll at the New York City College Film Institute and study film?
I've been a film fanatic since I'm 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, I went to see my first movie, which was called Knickerbocker Holiday. I didn't like it, but I liked movies. I liked going to the theater and seeing movies on the big screen, and kept going to movies. I just loved them. I wanted to be involved with movies. And then I got to watch television when television came in, and I decided that would be my career. Motion career.
So, as a child, what would you say your favorite childhood film was?
As a child, well, I guess I enjoyed Fantasia, Disney, one of the early ones I saw. And I enjoyed Anchors Away with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra. That was an early one. And a little later on, Stagecoach, directed by John Ford, starring John Wayne.
Okay, so you have been involved in the production of movies from the widest variety of genres: horror, comedy, action, romance, etc. What would you say your favorite genre is?
Well, my favorite genre, I've been involved with a lot of different types of movies, but my favorite genre, aside from horror and cult and all the other things I've been involved with, is Western movies. And they're just not making a lot of Western movies, but that's really what I wanted to do. I went to Hollywood to get involved with making Western movies, and when I got there, I found out it was all over.
So what do you think of spaghetti Western?
Well, I think they're valid, good Westerns. The Italian Westerns, they made a lot of great ones, and they shoot in Almeria, Spain. You couldn't tell it's not the real West. And I was supposed to work on a big spaghetti Western many years ago that Al Adamson was going to do with Robert Taylor and a lot of well-known actors, and didn't happen. But we were getting all set to go to Spain and work on that film.
It must have been a bummer not to go.
Well, you know, a friend of mine said it's just another train I missed.
So would you say you had a lot of those trains, that you've been on, just traveling the world, going to different countries and making films?
Well, I would say that more things have worked out than have not worked out, or I wouldn't have had a career and you wouldn't be interviewing me. So more things have worked out, and I basically have made pictures in the United States, not overseas, although I've been involved with overseas companies.
Okay. So is there any genre you would also enjoy working on, but you haven't so far?
Well, I like musicals, and I've had slight involvement with that, but I'd like to make musicals. I like them. And I like intimate, personal stories, small characters, a man and a woman, their relationship, some other people, maybe 6 people in the cast. I like that kind of a picture.
Okay, sounds good. How and when have you met Al Adamson, and when have you started working together?
I went to Hollywood in search of fame and fortune as a kid in 1962. I met his father, Denver Dixon, who I was interested in. He'd been a silent movie producer and director and star, and I had one of his silent movies. So I was anxious to meet Denver Dixon. And when I went to his home, Al came by. He dropped by, and he was running a nightclub in the San Fernando Valley called the Mutiny at the time, and he wasn't in the film business. But I met him, and that was just a passing meeting. But it was years later that Al decided he wanted to make films and leave the nightclub business, and his father said, "You've got to see Sam Sherman in New York. You fellows will work together." He just put us together, and that's what happened.
Would you say that meeting Al Adamson had a lot to do with the founding of Independent International Pictures?
Meeting Al Adamson in 1962 through his father, Denver Dixon, directly influenced the founding of Independent International Pictures. We were involved with making films for a number of years. We couldn't get them distributed, and his father said, "My son and you better decide to get out of this industry until you get your own distribution. So Al once said in an interview, independent international pictures was a concept of his father, which was absolutely true. I just gave it a name, but his father was the one who took me by the hand, showed me how to distribute films, and I learned through him.
Okay. So you worked as a producer, screenwriter, and director. What was your preferred type of work in this business?
I started out not knowing what I wanted to do. I was always a writer. I used to work on school newspapers. I got into the magazine business, so I was always interested in writing. I was interested in history. I was interested in photography, still photography, motion picture photography. I covered the gamut of things you could like to do, but I always wanted to be a director. But I wondered myself, if I would direct films, where would they go? So I didn't have that answer until I met Denver Dixon, and I realized the way Al Adamson worked on these small budgets that we had, I didn't want to work like that. The work was just too hard, 18-hour days and through all kinds of problems, and I didn't want to do that. I said, I'm going to table directing because it's just too difficult on small films.
So, when you said you started off as a writer, starting off young as a writer, did you look for a thematic issue, themes, morals in the stories that you wrote? Was it always like that, or was it just you're writing something just to write something?
Well, I didn't write it as a hobby. In other words, a lot of people like to write, and they'll write a book or they'll write a script, and it doesn't go anywhere. I generally have not written for no purpose. When I wrote for magazines, I got paid. When I wrote for scripts, I got paid. And whenever I did something, I was a professional writer, and I liked the idea that if I did work, I would be paid for it. I wouldn't just do it for nothing. So I wasn't just doing it to amuse myself. But if you ask me the kind of things I like to write, I liked mystery and horror themes and weird, strange, anything that you can put the strange word into and the weird word into. I liked that because it captured people's imagination. Something strange and offbeat was very imaginative, and I liked doing it. And one small picture Al Adamson and I made was Nurse Sherry, and it was an idea that I came up with Al, and we stayed up on the phone 6 hours on a long-distance call and wrote the basic story of the film. And the idea of it was very weird, and that's what made that successful. And he did it well in the directing sense because he was able to capture that weird mood in the film.
In Germany in the 1960s, the Edgar Wallace movie series was extremely popular and received international attention as the German Wallace wave. Is it true that you have shot 20 years later new footage for the German movie Die Blue Hand, internationally known as The Bloody Dead?
Edgar Wallace was a very famous writer of mystery novels. He also wrote the original King Kong. His books were popular all over the world, especially in the German translated versions in Germany. They were very popular over there. So in the I think it started in the 50s, going into the 60s, a series of Edgar Wallace films were made, largely by Rialto Film. They were quite successful, first in black and white, then color films. I bought the U.S. rights to one called The Blue Hand. I licensed the theatrical rights to Roger Corman, who changed the title to Creature with the Blue Hand. But I had the home video rights, and I had somebody interested in putting it out, and I was interested in licensing it to them until someone pirated the film in the United States, and it killed it. So I just took it off the market. I waited a number of years where the pirated version would be forgotten, and I went ahead and decided to reshoot it with more blood and gore, call it The Bloody Dead, and do something with it in home video. So I did that, and still they didn't want it. The pirated version had hurt it that badly. So I just kept it on the shelf for a number of years, and when I put out a group of horror films with Image Entertainment, that was in the package. And it did reasonable business, but not as big as it would have been had it never been pirated in the United States.
So you're saying the version that you made, that would be the U.S. version of this film?
It was the The version I made of The Bloody Dead was the home video version, but because it was such an unusual situation, I put both on the same DVD. So you could see Creature with the Blue Hand, the original version, and you could see my version with about a half an hour of new footage that we shot. And we went to a studio and had them rebuild parts of the sets from the original movies. And we doubled actors into the scenes. It's amazing what we did.
The steel claw in The Bloody Dead awakens the association with Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street series. Do you see any parallels between those two films? Was the marketing of this more than 20 years old movie successful?
The Creature with the Blue Hand, which with my gory footage became The Bloody Dead, had in the original footage a dark hooded character with a steel-fingered hand, grab people by the throat, kill them that way. And that is no doubt in my mind that the Freddy Krueger idea with that hand was taken from that movie. Somebody just saw it, liked the idea, and as they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Very true. The Al Adamson movie, Horror of the Blood Monsters, is a composition of 3 movies from various sources and of new scenes. What you could say about the making of the film, what was the idea behind it? How have you handled the problem that the old material was only available in black and white?
Horror of the Blood Monsters was a most strange project. It was just as Al Adamson and myself were starting in the business, and Al had come across a film called Attack of the Crab Monsters or Attack of the Claw Monsters, some silly name like that. It was a Philippine film dubbed into English that the producer had brought to Hollywood, was trying to sell. Nobody wanted it. But Al was aware of the fact, through his father, that films could be reshot and repurposed and changed. So he wished to acquire this and change this film. So I asked him what was his idea. And he told me, tint the black and white footage red, set it on another planet, and shoot a space flight to that planet and tie in the new footage in color with the red tinted footage. And he would put some names in the film. So he came back to New York, and nobody was interested in it. I was involved at the time with Hemisphere Pictures that was making the Blood Island films in the Philippines, and I was involved with them in working for them at the time. Murphy, quiet. Can you cut any of this together? I mean,
Yeah, we're going to cut this all together.
Okay. I was involved with Hemisphere Pictures at the time with the Blood Island films that were made in the Philippines, and Al came back to New York with this black and white picture and screened it for me and for Hemisphere Pictures, and Hemisphere Pictures had no interest in it at all. They said, we can't use black and white. Everybody wants color. They don't want black and white anymore. And I said, well, I'm going to tint the black and white footage red. Well, they already had a film that was part color and part tinted called The Blood Drinkers. And Erwin Pizer, the head of Hemisphere, said, we want to be known at Hemisphere for having color horror pictures, not tinted horror pictures. One is enough. We don't want the second one. Well, we ended up with the second one, and Independent International ended up with both of those films. And we still haven't been called the home of tinted horror films, but I guess we are. But Al went ahead and shot the spaceship footage and the tie-in black and white footage that would be tinted to tie in the old picture with the new actors. And he brought this back, and this was going to be called Creatures of the Prehistoric Planet or Creatures of the Red Planet. And we screened it for a few people. Everybody hated it. Universally, 100% hated it. And it was put on the shelf and forgotten for about 3 or 4 years. Well, once we started Independent International Pictures, we raised money to distribute films and to make films, and we decided we're going to use that as a home for these projects I worked with on with Al that we couldn't give away. if you don't have your own distribution company, you're stuck. But we had all these things, and instead of making them seem bad and unusable, which they were, we made them seem good. We said, oh, this is going to be great. We have 5 pictures completed and blah, 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 blah. Well, we had this thing that was called Creatures of the Red Planet, and Al said, well, what are we going to do with it? Because it had really been failing everywhere. Nobody liked it. I said, leave it to me. I'm going to do something with it. Now, I screened it at the lab, and I found that whenever we cut from the color footage to the red footage, you could watch that red footage for about 3-4 minutes, and it gave you a headache, and your eyes would get tired. You could not watch 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes of red footage continuously. It was horrible. So I decided, just as silent movies had been tinting black and white, I would follow that. I'd find a series of tints, and I tested it with the lab, and I found that amber was a nice soothing color, and we use it as they did in silent movies in the daytime. Well, that was fine. Then for night and the silent era, they were tinted blue because it almost looked like night, so we tinted the night scenes blue. Then when they went to the water with the claw lobster monsters coming out of the water and some of the other ones in the jungle, I tinted that green. Well, I went ahead and redid this film, retinted it, and now I screened it, and whoever saw it said, this is crazy. You're watching the movie, 1 minute it's red, 1 minute it's blue, 1 minute it's green. It makes no sense. So I had to abandon that. That made no sense. So we put it back on the shelf, and it stayed there for a while until I screened this version for my partner Dan Kennis, who was our executive head of Independent International Pictures, and Al Adamson and my partner. And he watched it with Linda, who was my fiancée at the time, and we got married later. And she watched this picture with Dan Kennis, and they hated it. Dan Kennis said, we're going to have to shelve it. This can't be released. Linda, what do you think of it? Well, Linda's not a horror fan. She said, I think it's pretty horrible. It's awful. And Danny said to me, we can't distribute this picture. Now everybody has turned it down. Now my own company is turning it down. So I had to stand up for it. And for Al, I said, look, Al got these backers to put up money for this film. We cannot shelve it again. It's got to be released. And I'll find out how to do it. And he said, well, if you can figure it out. So I sat in the office we had, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I take every word that has to do with horror, and I list them on a page. And I discovered, to my amazement, the 3 best words were blood, monsters, and horror. So I tried putting those words together. Blood of the horror monsters, monsters of bloody horror, da 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 da. And the best one I liked was horror of the blood monsters. And I said, Dan, do you like horror of the blood monsters? It's great. I wish we had that film. I said, we have that film. I said, it's the one you don't like, Creatures of the Prehistoric Planet. No, I hate that. But I'd like to have a picture called Horror of the Blood Monsters. It sounds pretty good. So I said, let me keep working on this. So my next thing to do was advertising. And I found a famous comic illustrator by the name of Neil Adams, who did the incredible, great piece of artwork that was our cover and our ad piece, and used wherever that was advertised. So it looked good, and we put together a very, very interesting press book and poster, Horror of the Blood Monsters, and everybody liked that. It just was incredibly popular. So now we had to have a picture that delivered that. And what do we got? We've got the old Creatures of the Prehistoric Planet with the green and the red and all that. I said, listen, let me go out to LA, and I'm working on another picture for us, and work to change this thing. So we decide that we're going to change it. And we're going to add footage into the picture to explain the tinting. So we get Robert Dix, who was originally in the film, and we bring him back. And Vicky Volanti, who was originally in the film, we bring her back. And we shoot a scene where he explains with a color ray gun how dangerous it is up on this planet because the chromatic radiations keep changing the color. It could be green, it could be this, it could be that. He kind of explained the tinting. Then I said to Al, it's still not very horrific. Let's open this picture with something about vampires. Had next to nothing to do with the film, but he shot it. And then I had my friend Theodore, who was a horror kind of an actor, do a narration. And we again explained the tinting. So now, we explained the tinting in the opening. We explained the tinting in the middle of the picture. We have vampires in it. And we made a good trailer for it and advertising materials. The thing goes out, instantly does business. Everywhere it plays, it does business. However, at the Holly Theater on Hollywood Boulevard in LA, the picture goes there. We shipped the print to them. The manager refuses to play it. He said, you sent us a print with faded color. He's seeing all this tinting. He thinks the print is faded, as a print will fade to pink or red. I said, tell this idiot to play the print he's got. He's not getting another print. It's fine the way it is. And nobody from that point on ever complained about the tinting. But that picture went on. It was successful in theatrical, successful on television, where we called it Vampire Men of the Lost Planet, because it was going on television at the same time it was going in theaters. Overseas, it was Horror of the Blood Monsters that did business. It was reissued overseas once Star Wars came in as Space Mission to the Lost Planet. Al said, we got to promote something with space. That's the big thing. We changed the title again. So with 5 or 6 titles this movie had, and all its different marketing tricks, it has been successful in every single area of the business. And you're interviewing me today, which proves it's still popular all over the world. And that was a picture nobody wanted, that we shelved, and the original people disliked.
Wow, that's quite a story. So it appears that the scenes featuring John Carradine were completed within one day. How was it to work with him in so fast in just one day?
I think John Carradine worked for more than a day. Could he have done it in a day? I don't know. But I think it was more than a day. I think it was 3 or 4 days. And John Carradine was a quick study, learned his lines fast, give him the script, he learned it, go right into the scene and do it, knock it right out. And he did quite a number of films for us. We were very fortunate to have worked with him. Now I got to stop for a minute. Okay. How are we doing? Is this picking up? Are you getting sound?
Yes.
It's a talkie?
Yes, sound is going all the way.
It's talkie.
Yeah.
Okay. And pictures coming through? It's in focus?
It looks beautiful.
Okay. It's not 3D. It's not going to be converted to 3D. Okay. I just want to check on that. Cover one eye, it'll be 2D. Okay, next question.
Ready? Are you good?
I'm all ready.
Okay, so what could you tell us about the unusual opening sequence showing vampires on Earth, which didn't fit in with the rest of the film's look?
The Vampires on Earth was strictly my idea to vampire up the movie, so we tied in with the vampires on the other planet, and I sent Al out to shoot these silly scenes of people running around at night, biting people on the neck. And we had Theodore, Brother Theodore, or Theodore, the famous horror actor, and he did this narration that I wrote. And it was goofy, it made no sense, but we kept talking about the Tubaton vampires on the other planet. We kept talking about Dr. Reining and his space mission. So I guess it tied in some incredible, vague way.
So in the Italian version of the movie, you could see additional footage from the Gary Anderson series UFO. How did this come about?
We licensed the film in Italy as Space Mission to the Lost Planet. After the opening success of Star Wars, the Italian distributor wanted more space footage, more rocket ships, more things that were tied into Star Wars. So they picked up some footage and cut it in. That's where that footage came from.
That's interesting. John Bud Cardo's director of the movie Kingdom of the Spiders, played a vampire caveman in one of the new scenes of Horror of the Blood Monsters. How did that happen?
John Bud Cardos, a great director, great friend of Al Adamson's and myself, a great stuntman, a great stunt director. He was working with Al on this picture, staging stunts. So when they needed to tie in a scene with the cavemen and the old footage on the other planet, he was made up to match those people that were originally in the Philippine footage, and he was shot in the new footage, and he came out with a big spear, and he went, "Argh!" And then they shot him dead, and he fell. Poor Bud.
So the international version of the film, Cinderella 2000, runs 103 minutes, which is 14 minutes longer than the original release. There are 3 additional scenes here to make the film spicier for overseas audiences, as mentioned on IMDb. What can you tell us about this footage?
Cinderella 2000, another story, another time. We made the picture in the United States. It was kind of an unrated, soft, sexy, kind of musical comedy, sex movie, set in the future, takeoff on Cinderella. I screened it for a friend of mine from Germany, Chris Neby of Monorex, and he says, "I like the picture, it's pretty good, I'd like to release it there, but we need a hotter film. We can't just put this out the way it is." So he came along with a friend of his and some other cast and went with Al in Los Angeles, and we shot new scenes for him just for Germany. And those scenes remained in the film for the so-called international version. Other places may have played it. Now, there was a scene where we had Snow White in the film, supposedly making it with the 7 dwarfs, which I came up with as kind of a silly scene. And one of the dwarfs says to her, "What are you complaining about, Snow White? This isn't even your movie, it's Cinderella's movie." That's my kind of stuff. Anyway, that was kind of funny.
So Dracula versus Frankenstein is one of the last movies featuring Lon Chaney Jr. What can you tell us about working with him on this movie?
Lon Chaney Jr., known as Lon Chaney, was ill at that time. He had cancer of the larynx. He was losing his voice, and working with him was difficult. He was a name, that's why we put him in the picture. Eventually, we had to cut out all his dialogue scenes and just have him play it mute. That's how bad he was. And basically, he worked on another film. This was the last horror picture he did, Dracula versus Frankenstein, but he worked on the female bunch for Al. But he also did a commercial, which he made before he died, for Al, and I don't know that it was ever used, warning people about the evils of smoking, how that had caused him to develop cancer of the larynx and cancer, and that he was dying from it. So he wanted to leave a message, just as Yul Brynner did the same thing, left that message.
So 1 year before Dracula versus Frankenstein, Dracula and Frankenstein appeared together in a German, Spanish, Italian co-production with the same title, besides the Universal Studio classic from the 40s. Were these the source of inspiration for the movie?
No. Dracula versus Frankenstein was a movie that Al and I came up with. It originally was called The Blood Seekers. When that failed and it couldn't go anywhere, I rewrote it and we reshot it as Blood of Frankenstein, and it still was not good. And then we went ahead and reshot it again and decided to call it Dracula versus Frankenstein. More takeoff on the Universal film, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, where we had 2 great horror characters in the one film, and that was the concept of that. I had no idea there was a European film with a similar title. My own opinion is that when I came up with the great marketing campaign of Dracula versus Frankenstein, the European film took that name and copied it and copied our campaign. We originated it. Even if their film was shot first, we originated that whole concept.
So, what new projects are you, if you're already currently planning on or working on, what film would you like to make?
I recently was brought in by my friend Sam Borowski, who directed a film called Nightclub, as producer on that. It had in it a big cast, filmed in Hollywood. Ernest Borgnine, his last great film, Sally Kellerman, Mickey Rooney, Ani Har, who had worked with Clint Eastwood, who directed her and discovered her, and a lot of young actors too. And it's a great movie, and we're seeking a distributor for that. It could be a big hit film. It's a wonderful movie, multi-generational, about young college people go to work in a senior citizen home, and they turn it into a nightclub at night, and it's very funny. So we're trying to get that into the world, and I like to make pictures like that. I have some other projects with Sam Borowski that are interesting, comedies, dramatic, crime films, and I want to go out of distribution and go back to producing 2 films a year at the most. That's my interest.
That sounds wonderful. And that concludes the interview.
The interview is concluded, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to be part of this project.
Thank you.
All good success with it.